Hey there, my name is Anthony Romano, and in this video I'm going to tell you why net carbs are really not a tool you should be using to manage your ketogenic diet. So, I think at the title I probably called them a lie, which is technically true, okay? But here's the truth. Okay, so I'm wearing a different shirt. I filmed the intro part of this video yesterday and filming this part today. Basically, are net carbs a lie? Yes, at least by the ways that most people on the internet nowadays present them. Okay, so some background context here, okay? If you're somebody who has done keto before and you weren't happy with the results, or maybe you're thinking about doing it, whatever your situation is, if you didn't have a good time with this, or you know people who didn't have a good time with this, it could be because they made a mistake regarding net carbs. So, more context here. The number one rule of a ketogenic diet is don't eat carbohydrates, okay? It's not you have to eat this, or you have to eat that, or you have to eat more fat, or you have to eat less protein. It's none of that. Number one rule is don't eat carbs. So, there's no other implications of what you should eat, but there is an implication of what you shouldn't eat, which is carbohydrates. And this is why the number one error with net carbs messes people up, because they can make a mistake that affects their carbohydrate intake. So the number one rule is don't eat carbs, which can imply that the number one thing you can do to mess up your keto diet is do something that will spike your blood sugar, do something that will spike your intake of carbs, okay? So the way that actually manifests itself in your body is through heightened blood sugar. So, if you're picking the wrong types of carbs on the basis of, oh, it fits my net carbs, okay, that could raise your blood sugar and kick you out of ketosis. So there's varying degrees to this, which I'll explain, but my number one rule of the practical application of keto is quality over quantity, okay? So quality carbs over quantity of carbs. So people often set this benchmark of, I won't go over 50 grams of carb, or I won't go over 30 net carb or something. That's the most common ones. But those aren't necessarily the best measuring stick to set yourself up with, because it's better to focus on the quality of carb, okay? Here's an example to illustrate this. If I have a 50 gram carb limit, okay, first of all, depending on your body mass and activity level, all these other factors, your level of adaptation, 50 carbs might actually be too much for you, especially if you're new to this. So, of course, somebody who's more experienced with this can get away with that at one point or another, but the reality is you want to start this off as conservatively as possible and start off to ensure that you're actually in this metabolic state to see how much you like it, because that is the most important thing to see what you can do with a dieting technique is test it to its full capability to see if you like it. Too many people mess this up, or they think, I'll do this, or I won't have enough protein, or I'll throw fat on everything to compensate. It's all misguided. Focus on the carbs, and this is where net carbs is so important. So quality, here's the illustration, okay? I could eat like 100 grams of carb worth of spinach, but because it is of the right glycemic load, okay, so the right density in sugar, the density of which it will raise my blood sugar is lower. It's higher in fiber, this will slow the digestion and essentially blunt the blood sugar response. So I could have a large amount of carb from a very fibrous green veggie source, and it won't impact my blood sugar as much as a couple bites of a Snickers bar. Okay, so the total amount of carb is higher from the spinach bowl that I'm having, which, by the way, would probably be very difficult to digest, and I think most people would tap out before they finish anyways. But either way, for example's sake, 100 gram of carbs worth of spinach compared to, like, let's say 20 gram of carb worth of a Snickers bar, or just pure sugar, which I like my Snickers bar when I'm doing like a targeted keto day. You can do it. There's ways around this, which you can watch my other videos to figure out, especially the targeted keto one. But a smaller quantity of carb has more problematic blood sugar implications than a larger quantity of the right type of carb. So that's the essential illustration. And, when we're talking other processed foods like Quest bars or protein bars or something, any miscellaneous protein bar that claims to be keto friendly, there are some, because they're getting closer to the smaller quantity of carb and some of the right ingredients are in there. It's more of a gray area, but see this to the end, okay? You have to understand the concept here. Quality over quantity. Now, if you're somebody who's more adapted, you can get away with more of the, quantity rules, okay? Because after a certain point of carbohydrate intake, a certain number of grams, your blood sugar will rise to the point where it's too problematic. But here is why the quality is more important. If I have, for example, so we already have this illustrated with the, gratuitous candy bar, right? Example. So now, if you think about like a fruit or something that people think, oh, you can get away with a little bit of fruit or a little bit of berries or whatever, your net carbs are fine, they'll save you in the end, don't worry, like that stuff, completely wrong. Because the type of sugar in fruit is called fructose, at least it's one of the sugars in there. So fructose gets digested in your liver, and it essentially turns off ketosis, and it makes it harder to get back into, because opposed to the Snickers bar, which I'm assuming is mostly like glucose and, pure high glycemic sugars. I'm not an expert on Snickers bar, so excuse me, just a candy bar, okay? Fructose, even though it's a natural sugar, it will still raise your blood sugar. It might release a little bit slower than, some of the fast digesting sugars in a Snickers bar, but it's going to go to your liver, which is like your backup team of carbs, okay? This is your reserve squad. It's not going to go right into your muscles and then get used up, allowing you to then get back in ketosis like the candy bar would. So in this case, a candy bar would actually be getting out of your system quicker than a fruit. So with the apple, basically you have, there's still some fiber in there, and the net carbs will add up properly, but the type of carb in that apple, being fructose, and due to the nature of how it digests, will go to your liver, turn off ketosis, and then take longer of a time to get used up. So basically, the candy bar would be a better alternative, even though you shouldn't do it altogether. So the net carb calculation of an apple or a fruit doesn't necessarily add up all the time. So net carbs are they're better referred to as an explanation to why a food is acceptable rather than the tool to assess if they're acceptable, okay? So if I look at, spinach, I'll say, oh, it has fiber. It's probably lower in glycemic load. It's a lower density carbohydrate, or at least in terms of its density in sugar and how quickly it digests. So I say, oh yeah, there's fiber in there, it's probably a more appropriate choice. But just because there's fiber in a food doesn't mean it's necessarily the most appropriate choice for ketosis, as the example was with the apple. So essentially the apple would be an inappropriate choice there, despite having a fairly, favorable net carb makeup. So on to processed food, okay? Because this principle still ties over to processed food. I had a subscriber ask me, shout out to Javier, about different ice cream choices or processed food snacks, right? Just a little treat here and there. And in Javier's case, he was adapted for sure. He's been doing this for a little bit of time. I've seen him, comment on my videos for a couple months. So I'm assuming that he's been adapted for a decent amount of time, doing this for a couple months at least. So in his case, even if he wanted to, yeah, he could probably have a little bit of an ice cream with a decent bit of carb, right? But you have to realize the makeup of a lot of these processed snacks, right? Ice creams, protein bars. They're typically going to be around, 20 carb and 10 net carb, right? Because 10 fiber, 20 carb. Or maybe some of them will be sugar alcohols, which will also have no effect on your blood sugar. So you can treat them in the net carb calculation, the same as fiber, but don't overdo them because they ferment in your gut and they can cause some upset. So basically, with any sort of processed snack, a lot of times you can look at the net carb calculation and say, okay, this is an appropriate choice to have, assuming the quantity of your day fits in, right? Quality is king, quantity is queen. Okay, that's the example for this, the hierarchy, okay, of how you should look at your carb intake and net carbs. I'll say it again because I want you to remember this. Quality is king, quantity is queen. So in the beginning, you got to focus on quality all the time. And then throughout the longevity of your keto dieting, still focus on quality. But if the longer you get adapted over time, and once you've experienced this without the processed snacks or whatever, or the, a piece of fruit here and there, then you can start considering, okay, I can have a bit of this, ice cream, Halo ice cream or whatever it is, assuming that my rest of the day's carb intake is appropriate, very low, basically. So that would allow you to squeeze in a little bit, and again, because there's not going to be any fructose sweeteners in here, hopefully. You would want to look for this in the back of the ingredient section. Because there's only going to be, at the worst, a high digesting carb, a very quick digesting carb in that ice cream or snack, it's going to go into your muscles, get used up. So you should use that in a targeted keto manner. And there's other videos I have on that, like I said. But when we're talking about fitting this in, there is a problem with a lot of processed foods. Because with a lot of processed foods, they see that people are looking for these net carbs. And they'll advertise only 5 net carbs, right? So of course, you look at the quantity and you see something like, there's 25 carbs in here, but 20 fiber, or 20 fiber and sugar alcohols combined. You have to be careful, because opposed to a bowl of spinach, where the fiber is inherently in the food, when there's a bar, right, or a snack, they could artificially add in some sort of fiber or sugar alcohol. And that doesn't always necessarily work to blunt the blood sugar response. So think of it this way. Pretend that a processed protein bar is a bunch of ingredients blended into one. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to lower the blood sugar. If I eat a Snickers bar and then I eat a bunch of psyllium husk fiber, it's not going to cancel out the blood sugar rise from the Snickers. But, it might have some effect, because fiber is just going to pass right through. But keep in mind, take each net carb calculation of a processed snack with a grain of salt, okay? So if you see, only 5 net carbs, look at the quantity, and if it's too damn high, I still don't really mess with it. Of course, down the line, when you're doing keto more so for maintenance and, keeping your appetite in check or other purposes besides, you want to get ripped, then yeah, you can make exceptions for these. But if you want the absolute best results for burning fat, you're going to have to be very critical of these types of snacks, which is great, because if you want a snack like that, you can simply make a 0 carb version of it with many of the recipes I have on my page. Like, I make a great chocolate. That one's actually really good. I haven't posted the frozen yogurt one, but you could basically mix in any sort of whey protein with frozen yogurt. I have a great pancake recipe. Like, seriously, it's the best one out there. And you can have these 0 carb snacks from sources that are actually low glycemic carbs. And then from there, if you want a day where you want some carb, then you can fit that in, as a, not cheat day, but through the same methodology as a cheat day. So that's basically it, okay? Net carbs, quality over quantity, okay? Adaptation, think of it down the longevity of things and focus on getting adapted first. If you aren't, realize that net carbs and messing up the net carbs in the beginning, due to the quality considerations, can make you have a shitty experience of the diet, because you're going to be spiking that blood sugar a little bit too much, and it's going to be making you keep having those sugar cravings, and it's going to keep the hunger in place and get your body not fully used to ketosis. Last thing I'll say again is, don't worry about depth of ketosis, just worry about being in the pool. You don't need to be in the deep end, just be in ketosis and don't have those carbs. It's more important than being in the deepest ketogenic state, okay? So that's it. Leave me your questions on net carbs. Leave me your frustrations on net carbs, because I want to hear, realistically, I keep a tally in my head of all the people I've talked with who have had negative experiences of keto or other techniques that I use, like fasting, and I try to internalize a lot of these problems they have and make videos on them. So let me know if you had any problems with these type of things, or if net carbs was a wrench in your plan. Beyond that, go to my website, romanoketo.com, for coaching, and follow me, subscribe, like the video, all that. Peace.